So, good afternoon, councillors, officers and members of the public. I don't think there are any in here, but we're being live streamed on YouTube, so anyone watching, welcome along. We're going to run through some housekeeping rules, so can I just request that mobile phones are kept silent or turned off? We don't want to be going into the realm of giving to charity, but if we do, I'll bring one to the fore. And then we're not expected to have any fire alarm during this meeting, but if we do, if we can just ensure that we go via the exits and follow our officers to the meeting point outside. And finally, if anyone wishes to speak, just remember to put ourselves on mute afterwards. So, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor David Brackenbury, and Councillor Scott Brown is here as his substitute.
Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, Scott. And then, do we have any, or do the members have any declarations of interest that they wish to declare? No? We can move forward. So the first part of the agenda item is for the minutes of the previous meeting. I'm sure we've all had a chance to read through for the accuracy. Excuse me. Everyone, are we happy to sign those minutes as a fair and accurate view? If I can have a proposer and a seconder for those, please. Thank you, Councillor Eglin. And a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Conway. So those can be passed, and I will move to sign those minutes. And moving on to the next part of the agenda, I'm going to invite Claire Edwards, who is our Section 151 officer, apologies, and then if you can go through the audit plan for 2024-2025.
Thank you, Chair. I will be handing over to our external auditor to present the plan, but I just wanted to take an opportunity to introduce you to the partner for Northamptonshire, which is Mark Stocks. You've already had the pleasure of meeting Paul Harvey for our external audit as well, which is Grant Thornton. So this report today brings forward to you, for your attention, the external audit plan for 24-25, and it will set out what our audit plan will be for that year, and sets out the risks and provisions that plan will be undertaking during the next couple of months in order completing that audit. So I will hand over to Mark to explain to you exactly what the audit team will be doing in conducting the audit for 24-25. So thank you. Mark, over to you.
Chair, my name is Mark Stocks. I'm a partner with Grant Thornton. I'm responsible for your external audit, as Claire was saying. I understand from Paul he's been talking you through what we do in audit in local government, because it is different. Obviously, we do a financial statement audit, but as well as that, we do something that's called the value for money conclusion, which basically looks at how the organisation is operating, and that looks at three aspects. It looks at financial sustainability, it looks at governance, and it looks at your economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And that's quite a broad church in terms of what we do there. I'll do a bit of a page turn, because I think for many of you it will be a new audit plan or a new experience in terms of audit in the public sector. I won't do every page, you'll be relieved to hear, but I will take you through the ones I think most relevant. So just taking you to page, let's see if I can actually read it with my eyesight. So to page 7 of the plan. So just to flag that one of the changes for this year, which is I think is page 23 of your agenda. So is that there's a new standard coming in for local government, which is IFRS 16. That's quite a complex standard. It's to do with leasing, and it brings in into play something called the right of use asset. So we'll be working with your team to get that right in your accounts. Just turning over the page, Paul's probably talked you through it a little bit, but over the last few years there's been quite a backlog in local government accounts, and so there's something that we refer to as called the backstop. So what the government had to do, it had to bring in new legislation to allow auditors to effectively disclaim opinions that had been open for too long, just to allow us to catch up, because there's not enough resource either in audit or in local government to have actually dealt with the backlog. And so you'll see, if you go back to your 23 to 24 accounts, those have been disclaimed, and so the process over the next few years will be trying to rebuild that assurance for you. So sort of looking at your accounts in detail in certain aspects, such as property, plant and equipment, and sorry, my computer's doing some strange things to me, but we have to rebuild that assurance. So you are looking at disclaimed opinions for a little while longer, but that's not because we're not working on your accounts. It's just going to take us time to get that right for you. Just moving on a little bit, so I'll just take you to page 11 of the report, or 27 of your agenda. So auditors work in risks. So that doesn't mean we don't test the other aspects of your financial statements, but we do focus our work on particular areas. And on that page, we just highlight sort of 5 or 6 areas where we're going to look in detail, and I will talk to each of those. So just moving down then, so I can talk to those significant risks. Page 13 starts, I suppose that the process. You'll hear me talk around management override of control. Now, just to reassure you, this is a standard risk. Wherever you come across an auditor, there's a standard risk called management override of control, and that's the ability of the accounts to be changed. There are a lot of assumptions that go into the accounts in terms of provisions and estimates and accounting policies that can actually change how they look, and so we do a lot of work around that, whether that's through journals or looking at those estimates and accounting policies. We spend quite a lot of time doing that work, but that's a mandated risk for us, so that's something that we're required to do by auditing standards. The other risks we focus on, there's a risk called I suppose revenue recognition, and it's the ability of that cycle to be inappropriately put together. So now we tend to rebut that risk in local government, because your income processes are reasonably simple, because it's kind of council tax and business rates, and that's no different here. So it doesn't mean we won't do any work on that. There's just no cause, in my view, to do any particular work in terms of those of the fraud risk associated with that. And similarly, practice note 10 talks to us around expenditure and the risk of fraud in that. And again, your general processes for recognising expenditure are decent. They're pretty good. So again, we've rebutted that risk, but that doesn't mean we don't test expenditure. We do test expenditure. We don't test it particularly to identify fraud. There are 2 really large estimates in your accounts. So I'm on to page 30 of your agenda. So your land and property, whether it's investments or sort of your general use assets, they're really big estimates. There's a lot of kind of process that goes into estimating those values. And because it's such a big figure in your accounts, we do classify that as a significant risk. So we will spend quite a lot of time auditing that. The other big figure you'll see in your accounts is the pension fund, and that can either be a liability, but usually in local government, it can be an asset, but usually in local government it's a liability. So now there's two parts of that. There's there's what's held in the pension fund in terms of assets. So are they brought to account properly? But then there's there's a rather large estimate under IS 19 in terms of, well, what is the authority's liability, and we spend quite a lot of time looking at that and making sure that's brought to account effectively. And then just moving down to page 32, you obviously have a HRA, so we spend quite a lot of time looking at your HRA valuations. Sorry, I don't know what my computer's doing. It keeps on flipping to another screen, so which is very distracting. Just on to page 33. When we were looking at last year's accounts, there were a few areas where we couldn't quite get satisfied. So one was around Section 106 arrangements, and that you hold quite a lot of balances under Section 106 in terms of development. So officers have been working on that. So we're going to pay quite a lot of attention to that during this year's audit. Similarly on cash, we couldn't quite get there with cash last year, so we will spend time looking at that in detail this year. And then at just bottom of page 33, I've already talked to you around IFRS 16. Just moving on to the page 34. So we will look again in some detail at agency income and expenditure, because often local authorities act as agents for other authorities or for the government. So, and that the income and expenditure part of that isn't brought to account in your financial statements, whereas I suppose the balance sheet items are, because those are actual liabilities and assets. So we couldn't quite get there again under last year's audit, so we will look at that. And then finally, in terms of significant risks, because you're a new authority, then what happened when the county was broken up was that the assets were divided between yourself and West Northamptonshire. Now, West Northamptonshire picked up the responsibility for resolving all the outstanding debtors and creditors for the old authority. Now, they've not quite worked through that, and there was quite a significant balance that wasn't properly, well, I suppose all the income's not been collected and all the expenditure's not been expended yet. Now, if they can't recover all of the income, then that becomes a partial liability for yourself. If they don't spend all the expenditure, that's an uplift for you in terms of an asset to you. But until that's done, then I'm not in a position, and neither is Claire as your Section 151. We don't have the information to say whether that's going to impact on your overall resources. So again, we will look at that in detail as best as we can. Now, I told you there was two bits to the audit, so I'm going to take you all the way down now, if I can, to page 44. And this deals with value for money work. And as I said, we cover financial sustainability, we cover governance, and we cover improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. So what page 44 just highlights are the areas that where we had concerns, also significant concerns last year. So we were, the Children's Trust is, I think, doing well in terms of its care for children, but in terms of its management of expenditure, it continues to overspend, and that gives you a difficulty because you have to, you're partially responsible for that. So, and then, as well as that, the funding of schools comes from something called the Dedicated Schools Grant, and at the moment you're overspending against that. So, so what happens with that? That sits as basically a negative reserve on your balance sheet, and there's a statutory override that allows you to do that. We're all waiting with interest to see whether the government continues to to leave that statutory override in place, but for you, there's a reality that you need to get the schools expenditure back in balance against that dedicated schools grant. So turning over the page in terms of governance, there were lots of positives in terms of governance here. So, you know, it's easy just to see the red, but there were some, you know, some really good things. But where we were concerned was really around housing and so how that was being managed. And so we did raise a risk in terms of that and the processes that needed to be strengthened. So we will do the wider scope work in terms of the value for money work, but those are the key areas that we'll be focusing on. One around financial sustainability, but two around the HRA. I'm going to pause there, Chair. I've probably talked long enough, but that's a brief snapshot in terms of how we're going to approach the audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It was a good overview. Do we have any questions for Mark? Thank you, Michael.
Hi. Thank you for that. Can you just explain to us how, I mean, we've talked about the backstop for quite some time. I've been on this committee for 2.5 years now. How did we actually get to being in a position where we need a backstop? I know you mentioned maybe lack of resources, but in my time as a albeit in the private sector as an auditor and in looking at financial companies, to say, oh, we didn't have time to finish the audit wouldn't really have cut the cloth very well. So could you just explain how you get into a position of needing a backstop, and are there other authorities in that position, just as a background for the committee?
Okay. Yeah. So the last part of that question first, that pretty much half of local government are in that position. So I think there was, I think there must have been about 400 or 500 sets of accounts backstopped under the process. In terms of how you got there, so rather than how everybody got there, because it is a different story for different authorities, then effectively when you were set up as two new unitaries, then you were, part of the requirement is for you to complete the old accounts of the district councils. So, and that took quite a while to be candid, councillor. So, and in clearing that, it left limited resources for you then to focus on your 23-24 accounts and to get those prepared for us for audits. And by the time they were prepared, you were so close to the backstop date, there wasn't any purpose in doing the audit. So there was a decision then to focus on the next set of accounts, so to make sure they were audited as best as possible.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Councillor?
Hi. Just a quick one, really, on the asset liability with the split when that happened, and there was the talk about the debt or the potential overspend on debt or underspend on the liabilities and stuff. What is a timescale on all of that in terms of what is allowed under the scheme, or any agreement that was made?
Is that more of a question for Claire? Do you want to go, Claire?
Thank you, Chair. So when we actually undertook the disaggregation of the balance sheet, at that point in time, we obviously made decisions on what we knew. But what we did do in the report that did go to committee was actually agree that the Section 151 under delegated responsibility would then, if there was any material changes that might have come out of further work that may have been undertaken through the audits, would have the ability to be able to review that work and change the accounts if necessary. So what Mark's referring to is the part and parcel of that work that's ongoing as we sort of get through more information, understand what more some of those balances are about within that's held by the West, and then we'll be able to make an informed decision as to what part of that is actually a benefit or a liability to North Northamptonshire. At the moment, we're working very closely with them to ensure that we can resolve all of those items and that there is no impact to North Northamptonshire. So that's the premise of what we're undertaking, but there still might be issues by the time we come out. At the length of time, I can't probably put a time on it because I think we have an ability or reciprocal arrangement between both West and North to be able to resolve these between ourselves. And the time part is probably no timeline on it. We've not put a deadline on it at the moment to us to be able to resolve that over time. We may call it, but I don't think at this moment in time I'll be able to give you a specific timeline as to when that would be.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor.
Oh, yeah, yes. If I could just briefly ask about, you mentioned the Section 106 monies and that it was an area that you'd be focusing on this year. Is there any particular reason for that? I do understand that there is a time limit with these Section 106 agreements. So is it possible that some of the money that's being listed on there actually should now be going back to the developer and shouldn't be listed as an asset of the council's accounts?
Thank you, Councillor. So in reality, I don't know. So the reason that we're looking at it was because there was an analysis at a high level, so we could understand sort of like, you know, what the value, the overall value was. But when we approach the audit, we need a detailed breakdown, sort of by each sort of development, and the you know, because the council had inherited quite a lot of information from the county that wasn't put in that way. It's quite a detailed exercise for officers to work through to give us that detail. So I think the answer is the council's still working on it, and the reason we're looking at it is it's a big figure, and we don't quite know. But do I have, you know, I don't have any of your concerns until I've done the audit.
And if I can just invite Claire to add anything onto that?
Thank you, Chair. So one of the issues that we did come across is we set up our Section 106 monitoring to be done on an asset allocation basis, not a Section 106 basis. So unfortunately, when we came to provide the details to the external auditors, our systems weren't able to be able to provide that level of detail. However, what assurance I would provide you is that our Section 106 officers do actually review the Section 106 grants and terms and conditions on a regular basis, and it does go to a development committee. So all of the Section 106s, as far as I'm concerned, would be within the timeline, but obviously the assurance that this committee needs to have is from our external audit on that basis. And whilst we did a lot of work on it, we weren't able to be able to provide all the information that the external wanted in the format that they wanted it. So that's just where we're having to change some of our processes and procedures to be able to accommodate that now for the new audit we're doing in 24-25.
Thank you, Claire. Any other questions from councillors? Yes, Michael.
Hi again. Sorry, I had a couple of questions. One was on page 47 of our packs, which is page 31 of your reports. It's just a background, really, is that we've got field testing July to November, and a couple of pages down it says 3 people, and it'll take 5 months. I'm assuming it's not just 3 people. Maybe that's the audit senior and the audit manager, and then however many. Is 5 months standard for authority audits? It just does seem quite a long time. Is that the sort of the standard that you do, or is this a particularly a complicated situation?
That's more the relapse time than the on-site time. So what we find on, because you are a big complex audit, so it's not a, you know, I'll start with that really. So this is a £1 billion organisation with sort of like a massive asset base, and so it does take time. So we tend to find for a large audit by like yourself, it would take at least 4 to 5 months. So to get done. But in terms of the of when we'll be on site, so we usually come out and we sort of reconcile the ledger. So you sound like an accountant and an auditor. So we basically make sure the trial balance agrees to the ledger. Okay. So make sure it agrees to the accounts. start to pick our samples and then come back off-site, give the council time to pick those, to get the evidence ready, and then we come back on site and work through. So it's quite a logistically complex exercise to do something of this size.
Thank you. Any more?
Sorry, and the second point was on page 44 when we talk about the Children's Trust. And you noted that it says, we note that the NCT continues to spend above its budget, will review the arrangements in place to support and challenge NCD to contain expenditure. I'm just thinking what arrangements are in place and what we can do as a committee, because this has been something that's been rolling for quite some time, where we know there is an issue, and we know that it's in the audit plan. I think in the internal audit plan, there's also, it's down as a high there. What can we do as a committee to sort of keep our foot on the pressure on the NCT to actually come up with something? I think that it's been a high priority action since 2022, and we've not received their latest reports, the 24-25 reports. So it's just what we can do is what I'm trying to get my head around.
It's a difficult question. I'll hand over to Claire, who's probably got a better answer than me. But there's a reality for you as an audit committee and as a council that the children's is a demand-led service, and invariably, in my experience, they tend to overspend. Now you can't. Yeah, it's quite trite. It's quite easy for me to say that, isn't it? You can't leave it there. So so the exercise for the council is to continue to build relationships with the trust and make sure it's doing all the things that you think it ought to be in terms of demand management, sort of alternative services, kind of bringing children back into the borough and providing your own services. So I'm sure your Director of Children's would have a much better explanation in terms of what's being done. So in terms of what you can do is check that those plans are in place. So check that your Director of Social Care is liaising with Claire and has a really clear plan on what you're doing, and check that then that's been implemented. And if it's not, decide who you need to call to account, whether it's sort of officers or whether it's the Children's Trust.
Thank you. So I think what I would suggest as a committee, I think it's very important, I think, for audit and governance to also start connecting with scrutiny. So what we've had in the past is numerous presentations from the Children's Trust around their transformation plans. Obviously, within here, we're looking at that assurance that we have either through the internal audit or through the external audits that they have themselves, that they are robustly managed. Obviously, what that won't give you is that assurance around that extra governance arrangements and some of the transformation work that we've been working quite closely either with the DCS or directly with the Chief Executive of the Children's Trust, and some of the really good work that we've been doing in that space. And like Mark's alluded to, it's very difficult to legislate for a demand-led service, and it's whilst the cold numbers or the cold headlines read that it's overspending, it's around ensuring that we've had mitigations in place and we've done things where we've been trying as best as we can to prevent or reduce that pressure on the organisation. And I think 24-25 will hopefully demonstrate that we have really tried to work very closely both with the West and with the Trust in that space to sort of contain some of those expenses, and we're really, and what you would have seen on the back of that is a really intensive capital programme as well, trying to alleviate some of the issues that we're experiencing around accommodation, the 18 plus accommodation for care leavers, and then the living accommodation for the 16 to 18 plus, and then really complex needs in children homes. So there's quite an extensive capital programme that's been born out of those conversations, which we need to ensure that comes to fruition and it does actually deliver the savings that we want to see, and that'll obviously come through some of the audit work and audit reviews that will happen in that space. So we need to ensure that everything's working in tandem with each other. So our Chief Internal Audit will also have insights into their internal audit mechanisms as well, and making sure that we've got that assurance coming back here. So I think it's that close working relationship, possibly with scrutiny, because there's a children's scrutiny committee as well. So I think it's asking, that the audit governance can ask children's scrutiny to also provide that assurance to you, as well as the internal audit and external audit work.
Thank you both. Was that good for you? Yeah, I think there's going to be an extra 10 people on the Children's Scrutiny Committee for the next meeting. Any other questions from any councillors? No? Thank you both. So it's recommended that the Audit and Governance Committee notes that the external audit plan for 2024-25. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. And then, so I now move to vote and ask for all those in favour. Please, show of hands. Thank you. It's unanimous. That motion's carried. So now we move on to the next piece of the agenda, and it's for the Internal Audit Annual Report 2024-2025. And I shall invite Rachel Ashley-Corn, our Internal Audit Officer, to present to the committee. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So, as the Council's Chief Internal Auditor, I'm required on an annual basis to give you an assurance opinion on the Council's overall governance, risk and control framework. So that's underneath our internal audit standards, and also the SITFA Code of Practice that supports that as well in the public sector. So the report before you on the first item from me on the agenda today is the Internal Audit Annual Opinion for 24-25. So that includes that annual opinion, and then it also sets out the basis for that assurance opinion as well. So I'm conscious that this is an opinion that the committee is receiving with new membership. The previous committee has received the outcomes of these audits throughout the financial year. So I will walk you through the process and through the report, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of the detail as well after that. So the opinion, obviously, is the main item of the report for you today, is on page 71 of the papers within the box. So it's not just a one-liner opinion, it has expanded over time in terms of including any limitations and explaining the basis for it, and also splitting it into the relevant sections in relation to financial control, risk management and internal control as well. So the opinion that I've given is of a moderate assurance level. So there is a definition of our assurance levels in section 4.1 of this report. Essentially, moderate assurance is our mid-range assurance. So it means that generally we have a good level of assurance over our control framework. Things are generally working as they should, but there are some areas where we have identified areas for improvement or where there's a potential risk. And where we have identified that, we have made recommendations, but it's obviously reduced the assurance opinion we've been able to give at the time of the audit. So the rest of the report does set out the basis for that opinion, as I say. So we've broken it down into financial control, risk management to oversee the activity, particularly of this committee, in reviewing the risk register and the embedding of the risk management framework within the council, and then an overview of the internal control environment, which is based on the internal audit work primarily delivered within 24-25. I have within the box included a few limitations. I just need to be clear on anything that I'm not able to give an assurance opinion on. So just to talk you briefly through those, and these are actually consistent with the limitations on previous year's opinions, so we are in a similar position. One relates to the Children's Trust. So as has already been mentioned today, it is a key deliverer of some of our statutory services as a council. So for me, one of my key sources of assurance on an annual basis is their own internal audit annual report and opinion. So at this point, at the time of producing this report and as of today, I've not yet received their annual internal audit report for 24-25, and it's not yet been to their audit committee. So at the moment, I have to put a limitation in my report that I'm not able to incorporate any assurances from that. However, as soon as that report is received, I will be sharing the outcomes of that with this committee, so I'd hope to be able to receive that before the next meeting or the one after that, depending on when I receive that report from the Children's Trust. Similarly, we also have hosted financial systems, so the council's systems for accounts payable, so making payments against invoices, for receiving income in terms of where we've invoiced customers, and also our payroll system. So those are all hosted up as part of a shared service. So the internal audit of these is also rotated around the different partners. So in 24-25, the accounts payable system was audited by my team at North Northamptonshire, but the other teams audited the payroll system and the income system. At the time of producing this report, and still as at today, it's only the accounts payable report which my team have been working on, which is the only one that's actually been completed. So we're still awaiting the outcomes from the other councils on the other systems. So I've just had, again, just to caveat my assurance around that. Again, as soon as those are finalised, they will come to this committee, so you will have that full sight. I'm just not able to include it at the time of this report. And the only other assurance that I've specifically included is around IT systems, which are hosted by West Northamptonshire. Again, I don't have the rights of access to perform audits on their network and their security, etc. So again, I'm not able to give assurance. So it's for management to seek that assurance as part of those partnership arrangements as they can. So the rest of the report then talks you through the basis for the opinion based on the work that we have done and what we're able to give assurances on. So on page 73, there's a high-level table of different assurance opinions and a comparison with the previous year. And then there's a much more detailed overview in Table 3 on page 75 of the papers, which shows all of the assurance activity that's been completed by the internal audit team during the year and the outcome of those. So again, given the new members, I'll just talk through the 3 assurance opinions that you receive on each report. So when my team complete any audit assurance work, they will give a 3-part assurance opinion. So the first is in relation to the design of the controls. So have we got a robust policy? Have we built controls into the system that we'd expect to see? Are they fit for purpose? So that's that first part of the assurance opinion. The second is in relation to compliance. So we might have a really good policy, but if nobody's complying with it, obviously, again, that's where the risk is exposed. So it's really there primarily for this audit committee really to understand where the issues are if we're giving a limited or a good assurance opinion as to whether it's the design of the control or is it the compliance element. And then the last part of the opinion, again, is very much for the benefit of this committee really, is to apply some organisational impact to the findings. So it may be that we've issued, for example, a limited assurance report, so there's lots of issues and lots of weaknesses, but actually the risk that's exposed is very specific to one particular area, and the financial risk is very low, reputational risk, legal risk is very low, so it could still be a low organisational impact. So it's just giving you a little bit of context around the findings on each of those audits as well. So each of those that's been finalised during the year is set out for you. I've also included the committee date that it was summarised for this audit committee, so that if you wish to, you can look back at the progress report where that was summarised. And each of those are detailed for you. So any that were not finalised at the time of producing this report will be included in future progress reports, so you'll have full oversight of all of those outcomes. So as members will note, on page 76, there was only one assurance piece that received a limited assurance opinion, which is our red rated assurance, and that related to agency staff and consultants. And this was an audit that was finalised in last summer, so came to the committee in August. And that was subject to some improved controls around the environment, so there were some good controls put into place, but we still found a number of issues with non-compliance in this area at the time of the audit. We also gave a high organisational impact due to the scale of some of that spend. I can reassure the committee that since then, all of the actions that were in that audit report have been advised as completed. So we have closed all of those actions, so that should give the committee some reassurance about how that's being taken forward. And I can also confirm to the committee, as you'll see in the next agenda item, that I've included a full follow-up audit in the 25-26 audit plan. So you will get some insight into the progress that's been made and any issues that remain in that area. There's also one further area that had received a high organisational impact, which again was around the Children's Trust and the Council's governance of that arrangement. So whilst the assurance opinions were of moderate, given the scale of the potential risks, financial and safeguarding related, we've given a high organisational impact on that as well. And again, subject to ongoing work and follow-up. So the other thing that informs my assurance opinion is where we identify an area of weakness within an audit, we will agree an action with management to address it. So they will then set a date and an owner for that action, and we will then follow up the implementation of that action, and we report that to each of these meetings. So when I'm reaching my assurance opinion for the year, I also consider the implementation of those actions, because if we're identifying a lot of issues, but actions are being taken in a timely manner, that obviously gives me a better level of assurance. So on page 78 in table 4, there is an overview of the implementation of agreed management actions. So again, just to walk you through this briefly, the first line are those actions which were agreed and implemented. So we've had 24 actions completed during that year. 37 of those were what we class as high priority. We have then 77 which are overdue. So 17 of those were due within the last 3 months as at the 31st of March. And 60 were overdue by more than 3 months as at the 31st of March. So I haven't gone into detail any more on these because you do then receive an updated position on overdue actions in the next agenda item. So I don't intend to go into those overdue actions further at this point. But this has given you a snapshot as at the 31st of March to inform that annual opinion. So also within the report is a reflection on the performance of the Internal Audit Service ourselves. So how have we performed against our own standards and our own service level expectations. So the committee at the last meeting received the external quality assessment that we had commissioned by an independent assessor to confirm that we were compliant with the professional internal audit standards, and that confirmed that we were operating in a conformance with the standards and raised no areas of non-conformance, so that should give you a good level of assurance over my opinion for this year. We also then had some actions coming from that to further develop and build on what we've already got in place to make sure that we fully align with the new global internal audit standards, and that's something that I will be continuing to report back to this committee as well. But for the purposes of this report, it gives you a good level of assurance over our performance and delivery. Also in table 5 is just some feedback scores from when we've completed audits, the ratings that we've been given, which I'm really pleased to report are all of good or outstanding. And just some reflection on ad hoc additional work that we've delivered during the year as well. So lastly, on page 82, there is an overview of fraud-related activity, so counter-fraud-related activity, and any outcomes from those that we were able to share. And then we further just provide any details in terms of the limitations and the scope of the work within the report. So that is a brief run through of the report. Essentially, this should provide the committee and the council with one of your key sources of assurance for the annual governance statement for 24-25. So when that comes to this committee, you'll see that that's one of the key sources of assurance over the council's effectiveness. And that's why it's important that you've received and noted this in advance of that report. So I've walked through that in detail, but I'm more than happy to take any questions, Chair, on any of the content of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Pass it over to the members. Do we have any questions for Rachel? Yep.
Hi, thank you, Rachel. Can I just clarify, when you on page 72 of our report, when it says in the report background, it says 76% of agreed actions due have been completed. Okay. Does that mean that the 24% is sort of added into your workload this year? So is that not going to stretch your resources if you're having to sort of do 25% of last year's and the agreed amount this year, or am I not reading that correctly?
Through you, Chair. So the 76% relates to actions that management have agreed to do. So that's not for us to implement. So we just follow that up on a monthly basis and we'll continue to report back to you on those. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And sorry, just one follow-up. Again, I may be not reading this correctly, but on the summary of audit opinions, where we say 50% are moderate, and your terminology is that moderate means there are gaps in the internal control framework which pose a medium risk to delivery of objectives, and controls are not consistently operating. From an optic perspective, looking on the outside in, are we saying 50% of our controls are basically not, are only, there are risks to 55% or 50% of our controls, and the other 50% are good or better or whatever? It just seems like a high number.
Through you, Chair. So this is 50% of the audits received an opinion of moderate. So within those, we may have looked at a number of different risks, but one of the controls we've identified wasn't working quite as we'd expect. So it's not necessarily a reflection of the entire audit was a concern, but if there was a control within that. And as I say, it should give you some comfort as well that where we do identify that, that would be subject to a recommendation and an action, and that's why we then look at the implementation of actions from that. So hopefully that doesn't make it look quite as stark as a number.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, I have one, if I may, Rachel. So when we look at the the lateness of our implemented and agreed, or agreed and implemented, we've got 60 that were late, so greater than 30 days. What is the lateness of the 10 greatest within that? Because it could be 2 years, 3 years, it's just greater than 30 days.
So just to add, on the next agenda item, we have got an updated position on that. So I think some of those, that might be where we want to focus more, because some of those implemented. So for example, at the time of producing the annual report, there were 2 that were high priority and over 3 months overdue. They were both actually over 6 months overdue. One of those has now been completed. So you've got an updated position in the next agenda item. So we do split it currently into over 3 months and under 3 months. I can provide greater detail. We have all of the data behind that, so I'm more than happy if the committee wanted that to be analysed in more depth. I'd be more than happy to do that. Obviously, at the moment, as well as part of your progress report, you receive full details on any that are high priority and over 3 months overdue. Again, if you wanted to alter that protocol, I can report that differently to you and have a different focus, but that's how we've reported previously. So I can give greater analysis on that, if that's helpful.
And just to the members, are we happy to keep it at 3 months? Less than and greater than, or would we like to delve a little bit more into the greater than 3 months? No, 3 months. Fine. Thank you, Rachel. Any other questions for Rachel on this item? No, so it is then recommended that the committee notes that the annual audit report and opinion for 2024-2025. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. So we move to vote and ask all those in favour, show of hands. Thank you all. That's unanimous. We can move on to the next agenda item. So this one is for the internal audit progress report. And again, Rachel, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report that you will receive at every audit committee meeting. So I like to make sure that you have constant updates on the activity of internal audit. So I do report to every meeting. So this report provides you with the outcomes of any audit reports that have been finalised since the last committee meeting. So all of these that were from the 24-25 plan were included in the last report and the annual report, but this just gives you a little bit more detail around the key findings on each of those. I'm also mindful that the committee obviously didn't approve the new internal audit plan for 25-26, so I have included a full copy of that was approved by the last members of the committee, and so that you have a full insight into what we will be delivering during that financial year. And you'll receive the outcomes in this format on each of those audits as they are finalised. So we usually have a handful of audits finalised at each meeting that I can report back to you on. So a copy of this year's internal audit plan is provided from page 97 of your papers, and this just lists out all of the assignments that we'll be delivering, and you can see the status of each of those at the time of reporting. And as they are finalised, you will then see the opinions start to appear as well in the later columns. So we summarise the key findings of any that reports that have been finalised. So the ones that have been finalised, as I say, were reflected in the annual report, not in that audit plan. But I'll just talk you briefly through those, and those are always summarised for you in section 3 of the report. Page 92 of the papers is where they start. So the first related to the Council's new income management system, which has been introduced in 2024. So for this, we wanted to get some assurance over the implementation of that new system in practice, and also to get some assurance over the Council's compliance with the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which we refer to as PCI DSS. So this is around ensuring security of data that we're handling for cardholders when we're taking payments. So based on our testing and our review of the systems, we were able to give assurance that generally there was good compliance with the agreed procedures, there was a good audit trail around the transactions and the activity, and we didn't highlight any significant concerns around how that was operating in practice. We did at the time of the audit identify a number of unreconciled items that had gone to suspense accounts, and that was something that did reduce our assurance opinion at the time of audit. We were reassured by officers that they had identified the root cause in relation to those and the technical issues that had given rise to them, and were sorting those out at the time to correct those unreconciled items. And there was an action agreed around that. We also were reassured that there had been a PCI DSS assessment for the new systems to give us some assurance around that compliance, but we still needed to see a council-wide assessment on PCI DSS compliance, which went beyond that income management system. So again, we've made some recommendations around ensuring that we still have that full council-wide assessment conducted and evidenced. So based on the findings, we're given a good level of assurance on the control environment, a moderate assurance for compliance, primarily based on the suspense accounts at the time of audit, and a medium organisational impact on those findings. The next audit from section 3.6 on page 93 related to a housing-related audit. So this relates to our severe weather emergency protocol, so where we have people who are homeless and how we support them into emergency placements, essentially during severe weather incidents, mainly over the winter time, as you can imagine. So generally, we're reassured around the controls in place, that we're working well. There was a good audit trail around those placements that we looked at. We did make some recommendations around improving the controls around the use of out-of-hours service, where not all of the controls are complied with in practice and they're not expected to be, but where those are then inherited by the normal system to make sure that risk management processes, etc., are followed. In practice, we had made some recommendations around this, and also formalising some of the record keeping to ensure that there's a clear audit trail on decisions. So overall, we have given a good level of assurance for the control environment and the compliance, and a low organisational impact, as things were generally operating as expected. The next, from section 3.12 of the report, related to the procurement of the new waste contract. So this was a high value, high priority council contract. So we wanted to seek assurance over the award of that contract in practice. It's one area where we would expect there to be good controls with the level of involvement of the procurement team and external experts and advisors. But we wanted to get that assurance for the committee and for the council overall around the compliance with expected controls. So based on the evidence that we saw, there was a good evidence and good audit trail of compliance with the expected requirements of the procurement regulations. It had gone through the right processes in terms of the different stages of the procurement, and there were no areas that we needed to flag for the committee's attention in terms of weaknesses. So we have given a substantial assurance opinion for both the control environment and the compliance, with only a low organisational impact from any findings. And the last audit was in relation to IT asset management. So this was looking both at the council's hardware, so our laptops and computers and servers, but also around software licensing as well, so a bit of a two-part audit. We identified some issues around the records, so what's referred to as the MAL, the asset list that was set up at the start of the unitary council. We identified a number of errors within those records, where officers still were allocated assets that were no longer at the authority, and also duplication errors, etc. So these were flagged to officers. At the time of the audit, the council was about to roll out the Ocadu project, which is essentially rolling out new assets to all officers and putting those into the new Windows 11 upgrade. So this is actually a really timely opportunity to make sure that we get up-to-date, accurate records for all of our assets, and we can then use that to take that forward. So we're reassured that that can be taken forward as part of that process. Similarly, we also made some recommendations around improving the record keeping on software licensing and expanding that spreadsheet record that's currently in place. Again, that is being taken forward. We have actions in place around that. And we're also assured that the issue that we flagged around assets that were being supported by West Northamptonshire, again, that is being addressed as we are moving more towards hosting all of those internally. And again, as part of the Ocadu project, will help to progress that. So at the time of the audit, we've given a moderate assurance opinion on the control environment and the compliance. But as I say, we're reassured of how those are being taken forward as part of the existing projects. And there's a medium organisational impact overall. So there is also an update on the implementation of audit actions, which have been agreed by managers. So on page 107 of the pack, table 2, we have had 26 actions implemented since the last committee meeting. And there are currently 58 which are overdue, 13 of which are within the last 3 months, and 45 are over 3 months overdue. I'm pleased to report that the number that fall into the category of high priority and over 3 months overdue has reduced to 1 at the time of this update. Any that fall into that category, I do give this committee a full overview on, full details of those actions. So in table 3, you have full details of that one action, which relates to the intelligent client function for the Children's Trust. And this is essentially the council's mechanism for monitoring the performance of the Children's Trust. So there's a status update there, which is comments from management about the current status of that action, how that's being taken forward. So we will continue to monitor all of those which are overdue and continue to report back to this committee. I will just note that the implementation of audit recommendations has been an area of focus for the council's senior management in the last year, and the number of overdue actions has come down significantly actually since within the last 6 months, I would say, when we were near 100 overdue actions, and we're now, as I say, down to 58. So it's a positive direction of travel, but it's something that this committee needs to continue to keep a focus on and support us in ensuring that we are challenging any delays in implementing those actions. So again, Chair, I've taken you through the report and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Would anyone like to ask questions on this? Yes, Michael.
Thank you, Rachel. It was just an observation, really. The home to school transport, which is, I think, Q4, that was raised at my first ever meeting, so that was like 2.5 years ago. And there was a concern, and I'm a governor at a local school, and they've also sort of expressed concern that the drivers didn't have DBS checks, and these are quite vulnerable children being taken to schools, often on a sort of one-on-one basis. So the schools were looking for some reassurance that all the people who are transporting their students have DBS checks and all the relevant checks, because it's obviously a big safeguarding issue. So I'm sure you'll cover that, but it was just a highlight to the committee that was raised previously, and it was a concern to the committee, and it also is a concern to the local schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? No? Thank you, Rachel. So with that, we will now move, so it's recommended that the Audit and Governance Committee notes that the Internal Audit Progress Report attached as Appendix 1 considers the main issues arising. We've now considered those issues, and I would like to ask for a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. So now we move to a vote and ask all those in favour. Show of hands. Thank you. That's unanimous and passed. So now we move on to our final piece of the agenda, which is the internal audit strategy, which once again, Rachel, if you'd like to lead.
Thank you, Chair. So my last report today is the internal audit strategy for 2025 to 2028. So under the new global internal audit standards, we are required to have a documented strategy which sets out our vision for the internal audit service and how we intend to get there as well. So this is the intention of this document. So I have developed a vision of where I want us to be in terms of an internal audit service. As I said, we had our external quality assessment earlier this calendar year, which was very positive and included a lot of positive feedback from our stakeholders, which provides us a really good starting point for this. So I would just want to make sure that we continue to build on that and be the best possible service that we can be and give you the best service as a committee. So this is my vision of how I want us to be seen by all of the councils that we are working with, primarily in Northamptonshire and then our partners as well. Essentially to be that key advisor, to be that trusted source of assurance, and to help the council to create, protect and sustain value as an organisation. So within the report, I've then set out 4 key strategic objectives that should help us to get to where we want to be as an internal audit service. So what I've focused on is developing our resources. So I mean that by both our workforce and supporting our team to be the best they can be, to develop skill sets, to support them in their training, and also to help them to be up to speed with the latest developments in our areas. But also in terms of the tools that we use as well, so making sure we're making the best possible use of technologies, that we have the systems at our disposal that we need to be able to do the work that we need to do to inform the council of the right assurances in the right time. So there's more moving towards real-time assurances, use of artificial intelligence and those types of tools that we want to make sure we remain up to date with as well. In addition to this, I want to make sure that we continue to be risk-based. So we always have a risk-based internal audit plan. So all of the plan is work based on your strategic risk register and consultation with senior management on their key risks for the year ahead. But I think it's important that we continue to drive that and to look at monitoring the plan during the year as well. So I will look to have more client liaison with directors as well to make sure that we're on the pulse of anything that changes throughout the year and redirect our resources accordingly. Any changes in the plan would be reported back to this committee, because you do have a role in ensuring that we're delivering upon what we expect to do, but it just means we can be more responsive throughout the year as well. And finally, I think there's a really important role around assurance mapping, and it's something that did link with the internal audit standards and our external quality assessment of where we can further develop. So it is a big exercise, but I think as an organisation we need to understand where our assurances are and where we have any gaps in assurance, and then use internal audit to help to plug those gaps as well. So I would look to have my team support that coordination of assurance work across the organisation to build that assurance map against the Council's key risks. So that's where I'm intending to focus, and this sets out a little bit more detail in each of those areas, and I'm happy to expand on that or take any questions. But this is brought to the committee today for your approval, and then we will then use that as a basis for our service plan, and also for individual members of the team as their objectives for the year as well would all feed down from this. So yes, happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions on this piece for Rachel? Yes, Michael.
Yeah, sorry for so many questions, but we used to put in a risk matrix which was colour-coded. Have I missed it in here, or is that not relevant for this particular meeting? Because we found that really useful before, you know, when it had the red, green, the high impact, high probability. That will that be something that you put in your future reports?
Yes, through you, so that would be included in any of our risk management reports. So usually when we bring you the risk register, we bring that matrix along that maps out where the risks are. So I think that would be important as part of that assurance mapping work that I mentioned, to map that out so we can focus on those higher scored risks. So I haven't included it in this document, but it is in the risk management strategy that was approved by the committee, and we will be continuing to use that in our risk reporting.
Thank you, Rachel.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, Rachel. And with that, then it's recommended that the committee approve the internal audit strategy. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. A seconder? Thank you. So we move to a vote, and all those in favour, show of hands, please. Thank you. That's unanimous and passed. So with that, we come to the close of the meeting, which is at 15:02. Everyone that here and gave us input, thank you for your time, and for the members, it's the first of many of our new meetings, so thank you, and we can close.